Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. The strange show with that unusual presenter, talking about the wide spectrum that is music and just discussing the many different things that we can technically talk about. So in today's episode we are returning to the wonderful record label of White Lab Records after our episode on James A. McDermott's album Kernhost, where we technically introduced the label, though we barely got to talk about it much because we got caught up in the existential experience that the album was. So, White Lab Records, a wonderful British label who released some of the most wonderful ambient and experimental albums I've had the fortune to come across. Their early albums were sort of these fake vinyl designs packaged in these little cardboard sleeves with Polaroid. Sometime, I think in maybe 2018 or 19, the label moved on to a more traditional cardboard sleeve design, still utilising the fake vinyl design for those CDs though as well. It creates for us a wonderful discography of experimental music that just feels very quaint, especially when you get to hold the physical copies in your hand. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, as we're actually here to talk about one of my favourite albums from the label though, a strange experimental release that captures a sense of existentialism in the form of philosophical concepts and ideas. Very exciting. So today I present Embodying Formlessness by Zhu. So of course let's ask ourselves, who is Zhu? Well, Zhu is the moniker for one Nicola Fornazzari, a solo project from the musician that combines elements of ambient, modern classical, minimalism, drone and field recordings. And so across his career as Zhu, he's released a number of projects under this moniker, these unusual electro-acoustic albums that are a far cry away from his years as a bass player in the hardcore band Entropia. And so yes, of course today we are reviewing Embodying Formlessness here, an album released on White Lab Records back in 2019, featuring the label's distinct vinyl aesthetic, in the CD format. And so to better explain what we'll be, discovering today, I think it'd be wise to just go through the Bandcamp right now to get all the necessary context before diving into all the music. With our next release, we welcome back Nicola Fornazzari, who is one half of La Petite Vague, a project which we've almost exclusively supported across White Lab Recs and our sister label Audio Gourmet. Nicola also records solo work as Zhu, with material released through labels such as Eileen, Cathedral Transmissions, and most recently Many Feet Under. The next album in the Zhu catalogue is Embodying Formlessness, which Nicola created by recording improvisations performed on his daughter Nina's toy ukulele, and then setting these into non-synchronized loops. These were made using various pedals by experimenting with blind looping, a technique used to create unpredictable variations of a certain loop. Additional sounds were layered into the compositions by adding mini brute parts, which were also fed into effects pedals, and these provide an array of high and low frequencies. The resulting sound throughout the 6th track that encompasses this album is one of a tactile minimalism, and the sound itself is a representation of the concept. In the period which Embodying Formlessness was created, Nicola was studying the two truths, fundamental points developed by Buddhist philosopher Nāgārjuna. These consist of relative truth, which is the conventional way in which we perceive reality, and absolute truth, which is the theory that objects and events have no intrinsic existence and no individual identity except in our thoughts. Both perspectives are true and neither intellectual position is the correct one. So in summary, phenomena are both real and not real. Things exist, yet nothing exists. There is a sentence in the Heart Sutra which inspired the title of this album. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness no other than form. Form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness is exactly form. Embodying Formlessness sets out a short collection of existential pieces crafted from the random placement of melodic source material, adorned with subtle electronics. This provides an ideal backdrop to contemplate the theme of the two truths, as you try to separate the difference of what is real and what is perceived. So, a very existential concept explored through abstract music. This is the kind of thing I can get behind, the concept of nothingness contrasted with form and identity and whether things exist or not. Dual states of being and not being, and its representation in the form of these strange abstractions of sound, caught in unusual effects and looped very strangely. Mostly all sourced from this toy ukulele, though there are some other instruments as well. The Bandcamp, not the Bandcamp, CD note also mentioned a Arturia Mini Brute, music boxes, rattle, looper and FX pedals, and sampler on iPad, which helps to add to the sonic tapestry of this album. Essentially though, there's something very existential about the concept, something I try to grapple with, but I'm simply not eloquent enough to properly explain and or understand, I should say. The existence of form in nothing and vice versa. But here it's presented in such a strange way though, And what I find remarkable is that the use of a toy ukulele abstractly stretched into the most unusual compositions across the body of this entire album results in something, well, fascinating. It's a very unusual yet wonderfully experimental sound odyssey, so let's check it out. So opening up with Cloud's Hand In. The opening track starts things off with this strange little melody of sorts from the ukulele. These acoustic notes resonating within this very space itself as the faint hiss of room buzz seems to swell up from time to time, setting the scene for the further abstraction of sounds to suddenly come in. As though the static is now taking over, you get a deluge of lowercase suddenly occupying the scene, delightfully buzzing in our ears as it all just pleasantly continues this abstract formless melody. I don't know why, but I find the whole thing so oddly delightful. There's a strange, certain ungraspable element to how it's all presenting itself. The natural notes of the ukulele offset by the growing buzz of electronics. Lowercase, lo-fi, and so much more that attempts to just take over the scene, essentially. You've kind of, for me, considering the themes of the album, you've got a reality of the ukulele, this acoustic instrument, and then the non-reality in the form of everything else that is occurring alongside it. Especially when it kind of all fades off towards the end though, where this looped electronic blip seems to occur over and over, an unusual yet oddly pleasant deluge of high and low frequencies. But there is something very strange about it, but I think it's just a delightful opener that creates a very strange sound world for us to briefly inhabit. What delights me is the sort of effortless glide you get from the source sound of the ukulele that opens up to the whole album, with this rather quaint, wistful melancholy. That then just transitions seamlessly into this array of electronic effects that take over the source of the track, essentially. Transformed into these faint clicks and buzzes that have very strange physical presence in the ears when they occur, apparently. It results in a very enigmatic yet delightful opening track that perfectly presents to us the core concepts this album's trying to present to us, of these dual truths, reality and non-reality, represented us in the form of a ukulele and electronics. But I appreciate how nicely it's all come together, resulting in a gentle, smouldering opener that lets us slowly decline into the album at this very lovely, calm pace. So our next track, Rain and Leaves. Conversely to the previous track, this one just immediately descends upon this loop of ambient tones rising and falling all around us, until the ukulele then takes the centre stage once more, accompanied by the unusual scratches and lo-fi buzzes of room tones once more. There is a beautifully pleasant vibe here though, like an audio representation of the rain falling upon the leaves, representing the abstract audio in the form of this visual image that you get. I should say that it does get a bit more strange when you get the descent of the frequency, which leads the way for these very unusual effects that come right up into the various channels of the headphones. Like being caught in the middle of a Japanese garden of some kind. There's sound of running water all around you, falling across the length of a beautifully green leaves that colour the landscape. As strange and unusual as it all is, almost artificial at times, with how it leans into electronics. There's something so delightful and quaint about it once more, something that feels wistful again. And I find myself just delightfully calmed by the effects that these frequencies and sounds occurring all around me. It's perhaps one of my favourite compositions here, I have to say, as there's just something so nice and comforting about it all. Now, still continuing to revel in the strangeness that the abstraction of the sounds offer themselves, and yet still somehow finding itself anchored by the naturalistic sounds that the ukulele offers. That classic electroacoustic thing of contrasting the natural sounds of an instrument against a backdrop of warbling electronics. But it is so delightful how it all achieves that and how carefully it all feels constructed to consider these rather poignant existential thoughts. As mentioned, one that's just always been my favourite, and whenever I stop to think about this album, I just always just think of that lovely little ukulele melody that comes in at the very beginning of this track. Like, it just provides so much, just so many good vibes, I have to say. Truly beautiful stuff. Our next track, Equipoise. So this is where the vibe changes a little for something a little bit more darker and melancholy, perhaps. So you're dominated by looped electronics, each phrase offering different levels of effects, just warbling and droning away with strange throws into abstraction itself again. And it's coming across a little bit more ominous, but the sudden appearance of bells resonating in the space kind of pulls us all back together again. Even contrasting the sudden appearance of high-pitched frequencies that threaten to pull apart the composition. It seems the more it all occurs, the stranger it once again gets, until the ukulele suddenly manages to find its ground once again, playing this very odd little loop that seems to stretch chords on occasions, all the while the continuing clamber of electronic occurs all around it. It's very weird, as the electronic elements seem very ominous and foreboding as this one just continues to build up, But the presence of the ukulele contrasts so nicely against it, though, creating a safer place in amongst this sort of strange sense of panic and turmoil, perhaps. It doesn't stop the vibe from being distinctly melancholy, though, and it comes across to me as a rather sad track as a result. Though, I should say the frequencies themselves, they feel a little bit harsh at times. But the drones that accompany it all, they just tug so emotionally, whilst the ukulele starts that act of pushing it along, kind of like oars descending into the river below and just floating down the stream, essentially. It's perhaps one of the strangest tracks here, really delving into, just odd, uncomfortable levels of frequency at times. But I find myself fascinated by the entire thing as it occurs, hypnotised by this kind of bedtime mobile effect that hangs above the cot and spins around and around you, of course. I think there's something kind of dreamy about it. And even though it's very strange at times, I think there's something wonderful about it. It perhaps makes me the most uncomfortable out of all the tracks, but even as oddly terrifying as it threatens to become, there's still an odd comforting nature embedded within all of those weird layers. Once again, it kind of, comes across to me as that contrast of the two opposite values battling against each other, pulling you both ways at the same time across the length of the track. And it's unusual how it all occurs, and yet so effective in how it managed to achieve it all. Strangely odd, inaccessible song on this album, but one that reveals this world of fascination if you dare to venture through it all. So, our next track, I Plead Birds. A faint lo-fi hum before the rattling of objects occurs against this loop of tones, like a telephone caught in an effect almost. It's brief few moments captured and extended into these long lengths of time. And it then kind of loosely explores very unusual sound interactions, though, contrasting rattling effects against these looped frequencies, evolving it so slowly over time that it just lets more objects continue the unusual little rattles, and the continuing of those loops. It's definitely perhaps one of the stranger tracks we have here, as it continues to just continue to occur across the length of the composition without really transforming it into anything else, which is quite odd in a weird way. As well, we don't even get a prominent feature of the ukulele here, which feels like one of the main driving forces of the album up to this point. And now, maybe it's absent upon this recording, or maybe it just appears to be absent. It's hard to know exactly what's going on, as so many effects seem to introduce themselves across the length of the songs. It seems very likely that perhaps, on the ukulele has now been sort of warped and affected into these more abstract tones, essentially. Yes, you do get sounds that definitely sound like the ukulele, and then some other sounds introduced afterwards, and then you get certain occurrences that bring out sort of a medley of effects, loops of varying lengths occurring with this almost randomization against each other. And it becomes almost impossible to discern the truth behind anything, as it appears to be purposely obscured in the composition and even in the liner notes as well. And with so much happening on this one, the processing of our brain is sometimes tricked by what we are hearing, or maybe even expecting to hear. For me, it comes across as a further pushing of that enigmatic existential music that embodies the character of this very album. This abstract consideration of, form and formlessness. And the more I consider it, the more I feel my own brain being pulled apart. Difficult to articulate, but evident in the experience of what we are hearing. So our next track, No Mud, No Lotus. So this one I actually listed as being my favourite from the album when writing my little Bandcamp review. I can't remember why, so let's find out. So this one brings back the ukulele once more. This odd lo-fi of notes looping over one another as the warble of electronics begin again, hidden in amongst the faint rise of static and room tone that have occupied a lot of these recordings. It seems to create this odd growing presence as it all occurs, the electronics wanting to pull into the realms of the abstract once more, while the loops continue to push it along. And it then becomes a delightful yet ominous little deluge of electronics resonating and vibrating within the ears with this very lovely physical effect. And the drones become more persistent, arguably, further pushing us into the realms of uncertainty itself, especially when the loop of the ukulele fades out, leaving just this growing deluge of electronics to occur, a faint low end rising out amongst these odd frequencies. I find it very hypnotizing, especially when the electronics become the more dominant loop, before being accompanied by the gliding of these very unusual effects, these sound spectres coming in all around us with these odd deluge of effects again. And the way that this one feels so abstractly drawn with such minimal details occurring, it makes for a very oddly foreboding experience, especially when the frequencies become louder and harsher. But just as you think it'll all occupy an area of maybe fear and tension, it seems to transform itself once again, moving away from the scene and averting the gaze into a different direction instead. And I find it just oddly fascinating that across the course of this album we started with something oddly relaxing, and it seems to have grown into something entirely different, leaning more heavily on newer elements than the ones we've actually been used to and introduced to. And it kind of means that this album has been in a constant state of flux, I feel, travelling back and forth between different states, and as a result, being wonderfully unpredictable. And this one seems to just get stranger and stranger, as it all occurs, creating an odd sense of deja vu the more it occurs, while still establishing new sound worlds for us to inhabit within. And I feel like it becomes very loud and tumultuous towards the end, as the sounds can no longer even contain themselves, just threatening to tear apart the entire composition. Without a doubt, one of the strangest ones we have on here, and I have absolutely no memory of why this one was my favourite all that time ago. Maybe I was drawn to the incredibly abstract nature of the entire track, especially by this point on the album, after having navigated everything that preceded it thus far. Like, this one seems to perfectly embody once again those central themes of contrasting states once more. And it's such a fascinating place to find yourself at by this point on the album. So why did I like it? I sadly don't think I can remember. My own thoughts and feelings now thrown into its own state of flux, apparently, as I now try to reconsider what I felt without having a memory of it. It's perhaps I feel like, in an odd way, this is perhaps a little bit prophetic of what the liner notes were telling us. Maybe. I don't know, seems off. I definitely think it's cool, though. A fascinating track, even though it's a bit arduous at times, but very cool stuff. And so our final track, Cloud Hand Out. So essentially a reprise of the opening track to close this thing off. Just raw recordings of the ukulele once more, just to bookend the whole album. And it kind of just starts to relax us after the more tumultuous elements of the album so far. And I can't help but feel comforted when you get these lovely little effects on the ukulele, as well as when it places these certain phrases that just wobble with these kind of delays and reverbs. It's a careful tapestry, one that's made up of a lot of tiny little details of raw objects being moved around. But the melody that the ukulele plays is just too nice to ignore, and a welcome moment to close off this whole thing following the whole experience that we've just undergone. No more tricks, just a return to what started off this whole thing. Just Nicholas Fornazzi generating sounds from his daughter's toy ukulele and experimenting with the sounds. I don't know why, but I find the reprise to be such a delightfully quaint way to end off this whole thing. It just puts me right back into that good mood, just that Japanese garden vibe as you explore the instrument and see what you can really play on. The impossibility being the reality of it against the deluge of effects, that intermittently occurring from time to time against the shuffling of objects. And though I cannot tell what's real and what's not, apart from, I can't tell them apart. Basically, I just know that I'm delighting in it all, and I'm just pleased by the whole experience, even the parts I cannot fathom nor understand. And so with that, we have covered Embodying Formlessness by Zoo here. Another rather strange album that's very intertwined in these strange philosophical ideas of what it means to exist as something but also exist as nothing at all. But the way in which Zoo has created this abstract album experience, opening up with the identity of this toy ukulele, distinctly sounding exactly like the instrument before being pulled into an abstract tapestry across the rest of the album, deconstructing its identity while its source character remains an integral part to many of the compositions. It creates this audio consideration for this concept, phenomena that are both real and not real. Things exist, yet nothing exists. To go a bit more on that as well, the fact that a lot of the philosophical concept is just that things only exist in our own heads and thoughts, and my experience of it is what is the identity that I attach to it because of what I think about it. Oh, it really hurts your head to think about. But regardless, a fascinating release to me, and on the surface of it comes across as a rather charming yet experimental little album experience, one that pulls itself slowly through this myriad of different emotions and concepts. And as it all plays out, you do wonder the source of each individual sound could be at times, what is real and what isn't, and as it plays so much more into that philosophical concept the more it all plays out. But the core of it all is this album that just remains a fascinating little enigmatic experience, one that feels delightfully existential in such a charming way, even when the album has navigated itself to more cautious and anxious moments. And although rather short for the most part, it's an album that's brimming with wonderful creativity and easily one of my favourite things to have come from this wonderful record label. And so I think with that we'll be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music. Really glad to be talking about White Lab Rex again. There is a lot I want to discuss in this label and really get the word out about the wonderful musical releases they do. Once again, it's simply a case of just trying to sit down and consolidate my thoughts about one. This one in particular, though, definitely a strange little enigmatic album, I have to say. An experimental album diving into these philosophical ideas that are well beyond my knowledge and understanding. I simply don't have the education to truly understand these things, but the existentialist in me can at least find time to appreciate it nonetheless. So if you've made this far, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.